Hi, everyone. Pete Sacco here. Thank you for joining me. Today, what I want to talk about is meditation, or at least meditation from the perspective of what I've come to understand about it in my personal life. Meditation itself is as old as probably human existence. And there's been many, many people more wise and more knowledgeable than me who have taught it and have various um, books and tapes and presentations on how to meditate and what to meditate and what the expectations are. And I'm going to say that none of them are wrong and none of them are actually right, right? It's a very individualistic thing. But I can tell you that for me, it was a multi-step process that took a long time. Information is not as easily available as it is today. And so it was a little bit longer unless you had the right um, gurus, teachers, advisors, read the right books, learning about it. For me, it's a multi-step process, and it goes through layers of first learning to settle the body, then the mind, and then connecting with spirit. But I think in order to do that, I really need to kind of give an overview of how I believe the universe works and how we are a part of it. And I guess the easiest place to start is with the self, us. That's what we identify ourselves with. And in all of the ancient traditions, we start with self, but we come to understand oneness. And so really meditation is a multi-step process, but it's basically a connection between the body, the mind, and spirit. And so the self to me is what I talk about in the book is a sphere of self. And if you think of it, a sphere is a three-dimensional object, and our sphere has many layers of it, and at the core, there's a core. Let's call that core being. And we'll discuss it a little bit later, what I have come to believe that to be. But I'm going to correlate the idea of the sphere of self to similar to a hurricane. And so if we take a hurricane, a living, breathing thing, and the hurricane is most powerful on the outside of the hurricane, right? It's a counterclockwise spin, I believe. And it has, most of its power at the outside. And as we come to the middle, we have the eye of the hurricane, and that's where silence sits, or the eye of the hurricane. That's where the stillness is. We're very much like that. On our most outer layer is all of the things, the phenomena that happen to us. And we need to recognize that all of that phenomena that happens to us is completely out of our control. It's going to happen to us, whether we're there to experience it or not. And so the idea that phenomena happens all around us is the outside layer, or the outside of the sphere. The way we sense phenomena is through our body, and the first layer is that the senses, touch, sight, smell, taste. And we experience phenomena through our bodies, through that sense, through those senses. Inside that layer are the feelings. Now, feelings, to digress a second, are stored in the energy centers of our body, as we've been taught through all of the ancient traditions, in what's known as the chakras, right? There's 7: the root, the solar plexus, the gut, the heart, the throat, the third eye, and the crown. And feelings are initiated in there. So as we sense phenomena and we experience through our senses, it begins a feeling. And so you've sensed that, right? I had a gut instinct. It was on the tip of my tongue, right? I could see it. I had and envision it. Oh, it's breaking my heart. All of those are feelings. Now, you'll notice I said breaking my heart, right? There's the emotion of love. That's different. That is your brain translating what your body is feeling. And then the transmission of that is the energy that flows throughout your body. energy is important because you're going to find that meditation enables you to tap into and feel that energy and eventually manipulate that energy. So again, getting back to the sphere of self, we have the phenomena on the outside, and our body experiences through the senses, and then we initiate feelings, which are a mind-body connection, right? And then inside that layer, we're going to begin the idea of mind. And so the first most outer layer, which interconnects to the body, is, let's call it willful thoughts. The idea of what we cause ourselves to thoughts and where we place our awareness. And as many people have said, where awareness goes, energy flows. And so if we put our energy on a feeling, we cultivate that energy, and energy flows in that area of the body or anywhere we place that awareness. But that outer chaotic layer, or still on the outside of that chaotic layer, is our awareness. And it can touch the senses of the body and the senses of phenomena that happen outside of us. And so as we go deeper in, we have our thoughts that we no longer control. Our subconscious thoughts and our unconscious thoughts. And as I write in the book, our subconscious thoughts, actually probably all thought, is derived from inside our brains, and our thoughts are created by the gray matter, the brain, which has been formed not just by our experiences alone from the moment we're born until we're sitting here today, right? They're actually formed by our ancestry. It's encoded in our DNA. So our thoughts, willful through subconscious, through unconscious thoughts, are initiated inside by the genetic coding of not just us, but all of the ancestors that make up us. Just like our body, our mind is created by all that were before us. And so when we begin to meditate and we try to heal the mind, just keep in mind, we're not trying to just heal the mind that we have experienced. It's the mind that all of our ancestors have experienced. And so we confront that. Later on, when we start talking about the use of psychedelics, is when you start to have those altered states of consciousness, and when you can experience those layers of thought that are encoded in your brain that take time and effort to change. And so we have that layer now of subconscious and unconscious thoughts that we don't grow. And let's throw visualizations in there, the pictures that our mind throws before us, right? And then as we get deeper in, we have emotion. And so once we get into emotion, we have a range of energies of emotion, if you believe the Hawkins scale, right? But I would go back to, in the beginning, that where I talk about there's an interconnection between mind, body, and spirit. It is settling the body to settle the mind, and healing the mind is to have more good thoughts than bad thoughts on a regular basis, so that becomes our default. So as we experience the world, we have a positive reaction, and we have willful positive reactions in order to heal our mind. Just like we treat our body well, right? We sleep. And so we sleep, probably one of the most important things we can do for our body is to sleep and get the restorative to rebuild the body and the mind, which happens during sleep. And then to help improve the mind, we want to have more good thoughts than bad thoughts. And so back to the layers, the outer ring, the worst energy emotions we could experience are shame and hate and fear and loathing and apathy. And then we get to the middle ground until we eventually get to the most powerful, energetic, positive thoughts: peace, awe, love, joy, compassion, gratitude, and eventually enlightenment. And as we get to enlightenment, I would argue that we're starting to get very close to the center of the self, the center of being. And so at the center of our sphere of self, through the outer layer of body, through the inner layer of mind, we eventually get to self. So in the book, I say, we are not our body, we are not our mind, we are our being. And what I mean by that is, all of these layers collapse into a singularity of being, which has been described as lots of things over time: God, soul, higher self, over self, and being. What I've come to believe is that, going back to my quantum particle physics days in college, before I switched to engineering, we have quantum phenomena. And in quantum phenomena is the observer effect. The idea that by observing a quantum state of probabilities, an infinite position and possibilities, by observing in the moment, we collapse it into objective reality. And so what I believe is that the self at the center, the being, is not just one being, it is the infinite possibilities of us. It is all the us's and all the potentials, and there's an infinite amount of spheres of self superimposed on one another that all collapse into one center of being, a sphere of being, if you will. And it is our observation that collapse one of those possibilities into the objective reality that we experience. And so that's why you hear a lot of people out in the world talking about manifestation. I believe what manifestation is the ability to be able to reprogram ourselves in order to make better and better observations, in order to collapse one of the infinite probabilities of us into an objective reality. So, I believe that ties into our existence, why we're here. So, I believe that we are here in human form as a form of energy, but in this world, in this universe, in this present, in order to improve this vessel from a body and mind standpoint, in order to improve the decisions, observations that we make in order to create a better objective reality. I believe it extends one step further. The being of self is not just the being of yourself, but is the being of self, the sphere of being of every being that has consciousness. And I want to define, not conscious awareness, that's a state of mind by which we put our attention and our focus, which then derives energy. I'm talking about pure consciousness, the collective consciousness of all beings. And so, if we indeed are a sphere of infinite possible selves centered on a sphere of being, I believe every being is constructed the same way, of every being that has ever existed or ever will exist, and their center is our center. And there's the oneness that we talk about in experiencing meditation. The feeling of vastness and connectedness is because we have a shared energy. What I like to refer to in the cosmos is a universal energy, information that is shared, not just between us, of all infinite possibilities, but all beings that have ever existed at all time, all superimposed and all residing on a singular point of pure conscious energy. So that's a pretty grand concept. I obviously don't have any proof for it. Where I've come to believe that is through my layers of meditation and psychedelic use and altered states of consciousness, is I've actually found this spot. And so many people from ancient traditions through modern times have talked about this awakening or achieving enlightenment. I want to skip to the end, and having an enlightened moment or having an awakening is not an end, it's a beginning. Once we've had an enlightened experience, it isn't like I woke up and I had white hair and long robes and and began to chant, right? It was a glimpse of something greater than ourselves, something outside of the sphere of myself, realizing that I was actually part of a much greater collective of the sphere of all things, of universal knowledge. Okay, so let's correlate that back to meditations. So meditation, for me, is a way that we can improve the body, improve the mind, and connect ultimately to that collective consciousness. But meditation is it's a many-step, lifelong process that's supremely simple, but requires practice and dedication. It's not like taking an aspirin or going to sleep. If I'm tired, I sleep. I wake up, I feel better. Yes, there's a certain degree of feeling better when you meditate, especially when you get in practice and you get better at it. But it's a building up a reserve. Ultimately, what we are trying to do is through our epigenetics and through neuroplasticity, we are trying to reprogram ourselves to a different way of being of self, not being of all selves. And we are improving this vessel by reprogramming and recoding the genetics that were created by our ancestry and the experiences while we built a prefrontal cortex, the last part of the brain that is created until you're about 25. And it filters all of the sensations that you have and translates all of the feelings into emotions and all of the thoughts, both willful and uncontrolled or subconscious and unconscious thoughts, and it becomes the filter to all of that. But we have the availability to reprogram ourselves. And like I talk about in Living in Bliss, there's ways to improve all the mind, the body, the mind, and the spirit. And really improving the mind, there's three ways. Meditation, there is cognitive behavioral therapy, which I found very effective. It was my first glimpse of how to improve myself, my well-being, my mental well-being, and then drugs. And not to diminish the role of drugs, prescription or otherwise, right? There's an absolute role in place for people who require a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI, and it does improve, and they're all serotonin based, and so meaning psychedelics, many of them are serotonin based, which is created mostly in our gut, but it floods our brain and it allows greater cognitive function, allows us to achieve altered states of consciousness, the normal consciousness that we are aware of. And in that, we can actually explore parts of the brain that we don't normally talk with. Neurons talk to other neurons. Serotonin allows us neurons that are close by, which normally neurons talk to neurons that are close by. We actually, if we have a brain that is flooded with serotonin through deep meditation or the use of psychedelics or other therapies, it allows brains to talk to other parts of the brain, and we have different experiences, and we can start to unfold, but ultimately we can also leave our body and we can actually experience consciousness itself. Okay, so how does meditation relate to this sphere of self? Well, remember, it's a three-dimensional form with layers that goes from the body to the mind to being on the inside. So the meditative layers for me are first learning how to settle the body. So goes the body, so goes the mind. By the way, the opposite is true. If I have a busy mind, I typically have a busy body. You see that mostly in the people with the incessant tapping and bouncing their leg or bouncing their foot. I know because I was one of those. I know Grandpa's up there somewhere right now laughing because he would go, Johnny, with the leg, and because I had a Jimmy leg, he used to call it. And so, but again, it was a nervous energy. My brain was a nervous brain, so therefore it translated into my body. So the first layer, let's learn how to calm our body. So that will be the first one we'll talk about. The next one is we're going to learn how to focus and concentrate. As you may know from the book, I have 3 little girls under the age of 7. And the 7-year-old is just starting to understand or have experiences that she can't explain. And so we work first with the idea of concentration. In fact, I have kind of a bone to pick with, I don't know, not just parents, but school, that, I hear often people saying, you can just pay attention, concentrate, focus, but we actually never really teach anybody to focus or concentrate. I know nobody taught me how to focus and concentrate. I've learned it from lots of smart people and reading and podcasts and all of the places that you go. But the idea of concentration is to be able to hold a prolonged awareness on a singular object. Now, here's the beauty. With the many, many meditation practices out there, one of them is to cultivate focus and concentration, and there's lots of ways to do it, and we'll explore those further on in the video. The third one, after focused awareness and concentration, is open awareness. Now, in the Transcendental Meditation training, this is mindfulness. Now, let's go back to our analogy of a hurricane, where all the action happens on the outside and to us, and we experience it. The idea of mindfulness is to be aware of all the things that are happening in and around us, but without fixating on any one of them, judging any one of them, or ruminating, deeply thinking about them and projecting where did they come from and where are they going. Rather, we just want to observe them, and we want to practice as though we were sitting at the bank of a river and we were just watching the day unfold and items, things, people, boats, ducks float by. Never really watching any one of them, but being aware that they exist, and also being aware that I have no control over any of it. I am just learning to observe. And so once we've learned to concentrate and once we've learned to observe, we can then approach what the Buddhist teachings are of Zen, right? Of the idea of experiencing both concentration and awareness, open awareness, at the same time. And so the Zen Buddhists have a saying, I believe, it is not one, not two. And so this duality of having open awareness, but being able to concentrate. And so that concentration is going to be on the present moment. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I would say before we get deeper in or to that spiritual center, let's talk about the next layer in what we talked about earlier is the idea of emotions and the idea of intentions. And so I would say the next role of our progression of our meditative practice is going to be once we are able to touch presence and concentrate and be aware, we're going to feel the energy in our body. Some people sense it as heat, which makes sense because energy is energy, and energy through a resistive creates heat. Some people experience it as chills or tingling or a vibration. All of them are correct. And for me, it is like it chills electricity, which makes sense. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, and so that's how I kind of visualized it and how my brain translates it. But it feels like electricity flowing through my body. And so we could feel energy and we sense energy, and we have meditative practices to cultivate the feeling of feeling what energy feels like flowing through our body. And then we learn to channel energy, move energy around for different purposes. And once we move energy throughout our body and we can feel it at a controlled level of awareness, we can accomplish certain things. We can intentionally begin to perhaps heal the body. We can intentionally begin to heal the mind. And we can heal the mind by reprogramming it for willful good thoughts. Remember, go back to mental well-being. Have more good thoughts than bad thoughts on a daily basis, and you'll live a good life. But if your default mode is to have bad thoughts more than good thoughts, you live a tough life until you can switch that around. And so the idea is that we want to have, we want to control the energy in our body, and we want to learn to channel it to heal our body, and we want to learn it to heal our mind. So we want to learn how to, now once we've sensed what energy feels like in our body, we want to be able to move that energy around for different purposes. Perhaps heal our body, and perhaps heal our mind, having more good thoughts than bad thoughts. Or channel emotions, have intentions. So if I'm not a particularly compassionate person, and I want to become a more compassionate person, and by the way, fill in the blanks: compassion, love, peace, joy, awe, courage, confidence. All of those we've experienced in our life. And so what we'll do is, once we can feel energy in our body, we can create a moment in which we were truly that thing that we are trying to infuse in ourselves. Let's use, for instance, love. And so we think of a person or a item from our future, from our past or present, that embodies unconditional love. For me, it's my little girls. No matter, unfortunately, sometimes how bad I am as a human being, they love me just the same and just as strongly. And so I'm grateful for that. But if I hold that in my heart and I focus on what that feels like to be unconditionally loved, and I can control my energy and gather my energy, I can take that energy, I could connect it with the outside, I can infuse that energy with the love of the universe, and then I can spread that love throughout my body, thereby reprogramming my body to be more loving, or more courageous, or more confident, or to embody more awe in my life. If you read my book, you know the role of awe. And so anyway, we now have all of the mind and body layers that prepare us to experience the self in a way that we never have. And so remember, the self of being, the sphere of being, overlaps with the sphere of all beings, and the intersection point of all of that is derived in meditation at presence. And there is where all the great mystics, spiritualists, meditators, gurus, whatever, teachers, all of them, most of them, work to be able to achieve presence in our lives. Today, it's a core value of me, right? I have 3 core values which are built on my strengths, my superpowers, right? And then I have a set of core values to which are who I am and who I want to be willfully, and I make sure I work in that direction. And my 3 core values are, first and foremost, presence, and then purpose, and then prosperity. And so if you know from the book, I don't mean just wealth, prosperity, I mean prosperity in all things. A desire to live selflessly and have purpose to do so, and have the presence to realize that most things are out of my control. And where we practice all of the meditations of self, they collapse in that moment of presence. And when we leave that moment of presence, we can actually connect spiritually to oneness. And that is the connection between how the sphere of self collapses through the body and through the mind to the center, or the sphere of being, or the sphere of all collective consciousness and universal knowledge, and how it relates to meditation. Calm the body, concentrate, open awareness, duality, feel energy, control energy, embody good positive emotions in your body, have intention, and then find presence and connection with oneness of the universal knowledge. In the next few videos, we're going to explore techniques that I've come up with for each of those multiple stages, one at a time, but I don't want them to be guided meditations, because meditation is a very personal thing, and it takes different amounts of time to do it. And, there's a lot of good people that have guided meditations. I still use guided meditations, even though I've been meditating for years, and I meditate every day. Typically a 20-minute session to start my day, small sessions throughout every time I need to calm myself. And when I want to treat myself, because again, one of my superpowers is concentration. And so I give myself the gift of concentration every day through meditation. And that improves my mental well-being and reprograms me to be a better vessel, better body, better self, and make better observations, so that I collapse my infinite level of probabilities into an objective reality, which improves all collective consciousness. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon.